Hey guys, tonight we're going to venture far eastward, to a land steeped in ancient mystery and monumental achievements. China. We often picture the Great Wall as a majestic serpent of stone winding across mountains, a symbol of immense national pride and engineering prowess. But behind that awe-inspiring facade lies a truly grim and disturbing truth. Being a worker on the Great Wall sucked. And I mean really sucked. We're talking about a level of forced labor, brutality, and sheer human suffering that, frankly, you probably wouldn't survive a single month of. It's a side of this iconic wonder that's far less glorious and much, much more heartbreaking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to the barren, windswept frontier of ancient China, specifically during the Qin dynasty, around 220 BCE. The air bites with a chilling wind, carrying the scent of dust and desperation. You are no longer a modern observer. You are a conscripted laborer, forced to abandon your home, your family, and your fields to serve the emperor's grand. Terrifying vision the continuous construction of the Great Wall. This isn't voluntary employment. This is forced labor, the ultimate burden. The project itself was mind-boggling in its scale. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, aimed to connect and expand existing fortifications into a formidable defensive line against northern nomadic invaders. This wasn't just about building walls, it was about moving mountains, redirecting rivers, and forcing a vast, unwilling populace to achieve an impossible feat. And you, along with hundreds of thousands, and perhaps even millions of others, were the expendable human cogs in this monumental machine. Who were these laborers? They were primarily conscripted peasants, ripped from their farms and villages. Imagine being told, perhaps by a local official with a stern face and a sharp sword, that you must report for duty, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of miles away. You have no choice. Failure to comply meant severe punishment, often death for you and your family. Your life, your livelihood, your very existence as a free man was instantly obliterated, replaced by the grim reality of forced servitude. Alongside these peasants were convicts, criminals condemned to hard labor, political dissidents, and even scholars who dared to challenge the emperor's authority. These individuals, already stripped of their rights, were often assigned the most dangerous and grueling tasks, working under even harsher conditions. You might see men with branded faces or heavy iron shackles, a stark warning of the consequences of disobedience. Then there were soldiers, not just to guard the wall, but also to build it. Entire legions were repurposed from fighting battles to moving stones. Their military discipline now turned inward, forcing their own ranks to endure the relentless toil. You might find yourself working alongside a grizzled veteran, his hands, once calloused from wielding a sword, now raw from hauling rocks. The journey to the construction sites itself was often deadly. Thousands of conscripts would march for weeks or months, across vast plains, through towering mountain ranges, enduring hunger, thirst, and exposure. Many perished along the way, their bodies left by the roadside, a grim procession of humanity being sacrificed to the wall even before a single stone was laid. You'd witness men collapsing from exhaustion, their comrades forced to march on, leaving them to their fate. There was no sympathy, only the constant, pressing demand of the emperor's will. Once you arrived at the construction site, the reality was even more brutal. You were assigned to a section of the wall, often in the most remote and inhospitable regions. Your housing would be a makeshift encampment, crude shelters of mud, straw, or rough timber, offering little protection from the elements. There was no comfort, no privacy, just the constant drone of misery. Your purpose was simple: to build. And to build, you had to move. Stones, bricks, earth, timber, all had to be transported, often over immense distances, up steep mountain slopes, or across treacherous valleys. There were no machines, no complex lifting devices, only raw human strength, crude tools, and the ever-present threat of the overseer's whip. You'd see men collapsing under impossible loads, their bodies screaming in protest, only to be forced back up by a brutal lash. This forced labor wasn't just physical, it was a psychological torment, stripping you of your dignity and agency, reducing you to a mere beast of burden in service of an unimaginable monument. You've landed on the wall, a conscripted cog in the Emperor's massive machine, already witnessing the grim toll of forced labor. But the true horror lies in the day-to-day existence brutal conditions. A relentless grind. This wasn't just hard work, it was an unending torment of physical exhaustion, inadequate tools, and a constant threat of injury, all designed to push human endurance to its absolute breaking point. Imagine waking before dawn, often in freezing temperatures, your limbs stiff and aching from the previous day's toil. There's no hot breakfast, no comforting amenities. Your morning meal is likely a meager bowl of watery gruel or a few handfuls of stale grain, just enough to keep you upright. Then, as the first sliver of light appears on the horizon, the overseer's shouts begin, signaling the start of another grueling shift. There are no weekends, no holidays, no sick days. The wall must be built, and you are merely a means to that end. Your primary tools are rudimentary, little more than an extension of your own raw strength. You're given a pickaxe to quarry stone, a shovel to dig earth, or perhaps a simple basket to carry materials. These tools are often crude, poorly maintained, and prone to breaking. Yet you're expected to meet impossible quotas. Imagine trying to chip away at solid rock with a blunt pickaxe, your hands blistering, your muscles screaming in protest, knowing that every swing is a battle against the unforgiving earth. The construction methods themselves were utterly reliant on brute force. Stones, often weighing hundreds of pounds, had to be moved from distant quarries to the wall. There were no cranes, no mechanized transport. This meant human chains, lines of men straining under impossible loads, using ropes, levers, and sheer will to drag or lift massive blocks. You'd be part of such a chain, your back perpetually bowed, your shoulders raw, feeling the collective strain of dozens of men moving a single stone. Step by agonizing step, up a steep mountain path. One wrong step, one lost grip, could send the entire load, and the men beneath it, tumbling into the abyss. Bricks, if used, had to be made on site. A laborious process of digging clay, mixing it with straw, molding it, and then firing it in makeshift kilns. This added another layer of back-breaking work, exposed to the intense heat of the kilns in summer, or the freezing cold in winter. You'd feel the wet clay clinging to your hands, the acrid smoke stinging your eyes as you shaped endless bricks, each one identical, each one a testament to your forced labor. The terrain itself was a constant adversary. The Great Wall wasn't built on flat, easy ground. It snaked through some of China's most rugged and unforgiving landscapes, towering mountain ranges with dizzying cliffs, deep ravines, scorching deserts, and marshy lowlands. This meant not only building the wall, but also building and maintaining the infrastructure to support its construction crude roads, temporary bridges, and makeshift ramps, all adding to your endless tasks. You'd spend days scaling slippery slopes, navigating treacherous passes, carrying heavy loads, often with inadequate footwear, risking a fatal slip with every single step. The overseers, typically soldiers or appointed officials, maintained discipline through constant intimidation and brutal punishment. Their eyes were everywhere, their whips ever ready. They weren't there to motivate you, they were there to ensure productivity, to push you past your physical limits. A moment's rest, a slowing pace, a perceived act of insubordination could earn you a swift, agonizing lash of the whip, leaving burning welts on your skin. The air was often punctuated by the crack of the whip and the cries of men in pain, a chilling rhythm to the construction work. Sleep offered little respite. Your living conditions were deplorable, overcrowded, unsanitary, and exposed to the elements. You'd likely sleep on the hard ground or on thin straw mats, crammed shoulder to shoulder with dozens of other exhausted men. The constant drone of snoring, coughing, and the gnawing anxiety about the next day's work made true rest elusive. There was no privacy, no personal space, just the raw, shared misery of forced communal living. While specific detailed accounts of daily routines are rare from this early period, archaeological digs often uncover rudimentary encampments and tools, reinforcing the picture of austere conditions. And then there's the relentless physical toll. Your hands would be raw and calloused, constantly cut and scraped by rough stone. Your back would ache perpetually, your knees would throb, and your muscles would scream with every movement. Exhaustion would be your constant companion, a heavy cloak that never truly left you. This wasn't just about building a wall, it was about tearing down bodies, day by grueling day. It's a testament to the sheer human cost of such grand imperial ambitions. It makes your most tiring day at work seem like a relaxing holiday, doesn't it? You've felt the relentless grind of the work itself. But the wall wasn't just built on brutal labor, it was constructed across a vast and diverse landscape, each section presenting its own unique and terrifying environmental challenges. You were up against harsh environments, nature's cruelty, facing blizzards, scorching heat, treacherous terrain, and even wild beasts in isolated, unforgiving locations. Imagine your assigned section of the wall. It could be high in the towering, jagged mountains, where the air is thin and the wind howls like a hungry wolf. Here, the challenge isn't just moving heavy stones, it's doing so on narrow, precarious paths carved into sheer rock faces. One slip, one moment of dizziness from exhaustion, and you could plunge thousands of feet into a rocky abyss. You'd constantly feel the vertigo, the dizzying drop just inches from your feet, as you edged heavy stones along a cliffside. In winter, these mountains became death traps. Blizzards would sweep down with sudden ferocity, burying everything in deep snow and ice. The temperatures would plummet far below freezing. Your meager clothing, often just rough homespun, offered little protection. Frostbite would set in quickly, gnawing at your fingers and toes, turning them black and numb. Imagine trying to mix mortar or lay stones with numb. Aching hands, the biting wind whipping snow into your eyes. Many workers simply froze to death, their bodies eventually uncovered by the spring thaw, perfectly preserved by the cold, a grim testament to the wall's insatiable appetite. Then, there were the scorching deserts in other sections of the wall. Here, the sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air into a shimmering, suffocating oven. The ground would radiate heat, burning your feet even through crude sandals. Water, the most precious commodity, was scarce. You'd endure agonizing thirst, your throat raw and cracked, your body steadily dehydrating under the relentless glare. Heat stroke was a common killer, silently claiming men who simply collapsed under the sun's oppressive weight, their bodies quickly desiccated by the arid air. You'd dream of cool water, a fleeting mirage in your waking torment. The terrain wasn't just about temperature extremes, but it was often rugged, uneven, and unstable. You'd be digging foundations in loose soil that could easily collapse, or excavating quarries where rockfalls were a constant threat. The sheer remoteness of many construction sites meant that help, if it ever came, was hours or even days away. An injury in such a place was often a death sentence. And let's not forget the wildlife. These remote frontiers were still home to dangerous animals. Wolves, bears, and even tigers roamed the wilderness, posing a threat to isolated work parties or stragglers. You'd hear their howls or roars echoing in the darkness, a chilling reminder that you weren't just battling the elements, but also the untamed wild. Small, venomous snakes and scorpions were also a constant ground-level threat, their bites painful and potentially lethal, far from any anti-venom. One misplaced step could lead to excruciating pain and a slow, agonizing death. The very materials you worked with presented environmental hazards. Sandstorms could erupt in the desert sections, blinding you, filling your lungs with fine dust and scouring your skin raw. Flash floods, rare but devastating, could sweep through ravines, washing away entire sections of newly built wall and the men working on them. These acts of nature were brutal, unpredictable forces that added another layer of terror to an already unbearable existence. Archaeological findings of worker encampments often show hasty, makeshift constructions, indicating the temporary and precarious nature of these isolated work sites in harsh environments. The psychological toll of these environments was immense. The sheer isolation, the vast, empty landscape stretching to the horizon, the feeling of being utterly alone against the elements, all contributed to a profound sense of despair. You were not just building a wall, you were fighting nature itself, a battle that often felt unwinnable. There was no escape, no easy path home from these desolate outposts. You were always exposed. There were no climate-controlled cabins, no protective gear beyond your meager clothing. Rain would drench you to the bone. Snow would pile up against your flimsy shelter, and the sun would bake your skin raw. Your body was constantly battling the elements, draining your energy reserves and making you even more susceptible to illness and injury. It was a relentless assault on your physical and mental fortitude. So, as you envision the Great Wall snaking across the landscape, remember the silent, often fatal, battles fought against nature's cruelty. The biting winds, the scorching sun, the treacherous terrain, and the wild beasts were as much a part of the construction as the bricks and mortar. For the workers, these harsh environments weren't just backdrops, they were active, deadly adversaries, ensuring that being a worker on the Great Wall truly, fundamentally, sucked. It makes you feel pretty grateful for central heating and air conditioning, doesn't it? You've endured the brutal conditions and the merciless natural environment, but surviving the elements meant little if your body simply gave out from within. For the workers on the Great Wall, inadequate sustenance hunger's gnawing pain was a constant, debilitating reality, with meager rations and contaminated water plaguing them and leading to widespread illness. Imagine your daily meal. There were no hot, hearty stews or plentiful grains. Your rations would be barely enough to sustain life, let alone the backbreaking labor you were forced to perform. Typically, this meant a small, often insufficient portion of millet or coarse grain, perhaps boiled into a watery gruel. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you might receive a few dried vegetables or a piece of preserved meat. But this was rare and often rancid. The food would be bland, repetitive, and utterly devoid of anything resembling comfort or enjoyment. This severe caloric deficit meant you were constantly hungry, a gnawing ache in your stomach that never truly went away. Your body, deprived of essential nutrients, would slowly waste away. Muscles, already strained by impossible tasks, would weaken, making you more susceptible to injury. Your immune system would become compromised, turning a minor cold into a life-threatening illness. You'd feel your bones becoming more prominent, your skin growing sallow, your eyes dull with fatigue and starvation. Consider the logistics of feeding hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of laborers spread across thousands of miles of rugged terrain. The supply lines were long and precarious. Food had to be transported from distant agricultural regions, often by slow, laborious means, across mountains and deserts. This journey itself led to spoilage, theft, and delays. What meager rations were allocated for the workers often dwindled further by the time they reached the remote construction sites, thanks to corrupt officials or simple inefficiency. And then there was the water. Clean, potable water was a constant struggle. You were often working in desolate regions, far from established settlements. Your water supply might come from stagnant pools, shallow rivers, or hastily dug wells. Without any understanding of sanitation or waterborne diseases, this water would often be heavily contaminated with bacteria and parasites. Imagine taking a desperate gulp of water, knowing it might bring a wave of dysentery or cholera that could easily kill you. Waterborne illnesses were rampant. Dysentery, a terrifying disease causing severe diarrhea and dehydration, would sweep through the camps like wildfire, debilitating large numbers of workers. Cholera, typhoid, and various parasitic infections were also common, turning the construction sites into breeding grounds for disease. A single contaminated water source could doom an entire section of laborers. You'd see men doubled over in agony, their bodies racked by fever and cramps, rapidly losing fluids. Their cries often ignored by the overseers more concerned with quotas than health. The lack of variety in the diet also meant nutrient deficiencies. Without a balanced intake of vitamins and minerals, workers would suffer from conditions like scurvy from lack of vitamin C, leading to bleeding gums and open sores, or night blindness from lack of vitamin A. These deficiencies further weakened their bodies, making them even more vulnerable to illness and the brutal physical demands of their work. Your teeth might loosen from scurvy, or your vision might blur after dark, adding another layer of suffering to your already miserable existence. Sanitation in the camps was virtually non-existent. Human waste, food scraps, and stagnant water would often be in close proximity, creating perfect conditions for the spread of disease. There were no proper latrines, no waste disposal systems. This primitive sanitation, combined with the lack of clean food and water, meant that even if you avoided a direct injury, you were constantly battling invisible enemies that attacked from within. The psychological impact of perpetual hunger and illness was immense. It eroded morale, crushed hope, and left you in a constant state of exhaustion and despair. The body, constantly battling starvation and disease, had little energy left for anything else. It was a vicious cycle. Inadequate food and water led to weakness and sickness, which in turn made you less productive, leading to even harsher treatment from overseers. While specific casualty figures due to hunger and disease are difficult to ascertain for the wall's early periods, historical texts and archaeological evidence strongly suggest these were major contributors to the high mortality rates. You might try to supplement your diet by foraging for wild plants or small animals, but the desolate terrain often offered little, and getting caught stealing food, even from desperation, meant severe, often fatal punishment. Your life was dictated by the meager rations dispensed by the state. Rations designed for survival, not strength. So, as you picture the formidable Great Wall, remember that every stone laid, every brick placed, was done by hands weakened by chronic hunger and bodies ravaged by illness. The project wasn't just built with stone and mortar, it was built on the silent, agonizing suffering of a workforce constantly battling inadequate sustenance, a testament to the brutal realities of ancient forced labor. It truly makes you appreciate your next square meal, doesn't it? You face the constant gnawing of hunger and the unseen threats of contaminated water. Now, let's confront the most grim and pervasive reality on the Great Wall: disease and death. The wall's silent toll. This wasn't just a construction project, it was a vast open-air graveyard where rampant sickness, devastating injuries, and a brutally high mortality rate claimed countless lives. Imagine the work camp at night, not the peaceful quiet you seek for sleep, but a symphony of suffering. The air is filled with the sounds of hacking coughs, groans of pain, and the whimpers of men shivering with fever. There are no proper medical facilities, no trained doctors in the modern sense. A few herbalists or traditional healers might be present, but their knowledge is limited. Their remedies often ineffective against the onslaught of diseases that ravage the workforce. Disease was the silent, ubiquitous killer. We've touched on waterborne illnesses like dysentery and cholera, which could sweep through a camp, dehydrating and killing men in a matter of days. But that was just the beginning. Respiratory infections like pneumonia and tuberculosis thrived in the overcrowded, unsanitary living conditions, exacerbated by exposure to extreme weather and constant physical exertion. Imagine coughing up blood, your lungs burning, knowing there's no escape from the bitter cold or the dusty air. Beyond the major killers, minor ailments became major threats. A simple cut or scrape, an everyday occurrence when working with rough stone and timber, could easily become infected. Without antibiotics, a localized infection could quickly fester, leading to sepsis, gangrene, or a slow, agonizing death. You'd see men with festering wounds, their limbs swollen and discolored, often left to their fate with no hope of recovery. One small nick from a sharp tool could sign your death warrant. Then there were the injuries. The work itself was inherently dangerous. Hauling massive stones up steep slopes meant constant risk. A slipping foot, a misplaced hand, a frayed rope. Any of these could send a heavy block tumbling, crushing limbs or bodies beneath it. You'd witness horrifying accidents, men falling from precarious scaffolding, buried alive in collapsing trenches, or struck by swinging timbers. Their cries would be brief, sharp, and then swallowed by the relentless demands of the construction. There were no safety regulations, no hard hats, no emergency medical teams. An injured worker was simply a liability, often left to die or abandoned. The sheer scale of death was staggering. While precise figures are impossible to ascertain from ancient records, historical accounts and modern archaeological findings strongly suggest that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives were lost during the various periods of the Great Wall's construction. It was so common that the wall earned the grim nickname, the longest graveyard in the world. Workers who died were often buried hastily, sometimes right where they fell, or in mass graves near the construction sites. Their bodies became part of the wall. Their bones intermingled with the earth and stone they were forced to lay. The psychological toll of this constant death was immense. You would witness friends, comrades, and strangers succumbing daily to illness, accident, or brutal treatment. The sight of lifeless bodies being dragged away, or the stench of unburied dead, would become a sickeningly familiar part of your routine. This constant exposure to death, combined with the crushing physical and emotional burden, fostered a pervasive sense of despair and hopelessness. There was no escaping the morbid reality. Every moment was a reminder of your own precarious existence. Historians still debate the exact figures and primary causes of death among Great Wall laborers, though the consensus points to disease, malnutrition, and accidents as leading factors. Even the threat of wild animals was real in these desolate areas. Wolves and other predators would sometimes be drawn to the camps, preying on weakened or dead workers. This added another layer of fear to the already terrifying environment, a constant reminder that you were far from the safety of civilization. For the imperial authorities, these countless deaths were simply an unfortunate yet acceptable cost of their monumental ambition. Individual lives held little value in the face of such a vast national project. The workforce was seen as an inexhaustible resource, constantly replenished by new waves of conscripts from the distant provinces. Your life was cheap, expendable in the service of the emperor's will. So, as you gaze upon the magnificent Great Wall, let your mind wander beyond its imposing stone and earth. Remember the silent, uncounted legions of men who died building it. Every brick, every stone, every meter of its vast length is steeped in human misery, a testament to the brutal reality of disease, injury, and relentless death. For the workers, the Great Wall was not a symbol of strength. It was a monument to their suffering, their graves scattered across the vast, unforgiving landscape. It truly was a death trap, wasn't it? You've witnessed the devastating toll of disease and death on the wall, but physical suffering was only one aspect of the workers' misery. Maintaining such a vast, unwilling workforce required a system of absolute terror, cruel discipline, whips, chains, and despair. The overseers and guards were not merely supervisors, they were instruments of a ruthless imperial will, ensuring compliance through brutal and often arbitrary punishment. Imagine working on a freezing mountain pass. Your muscles ache, your stomach growls, and you're fighting off a cough that rattles your chest. You pause for a moment, just a second longer than allowed, to shift a heavy stone. Suddenly, a sharp crack rends the air, followed by a searing pain across your back. The whip, wielded by a grizzled overseer, leaves a burning welt, a stark reminder that even a moment of perceived slackness would not be tolerated. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about instilling constant fear, keeping you on edge, ensuring every ounce of your dwindling energy was expended on the wall. The overseers were typically soldiers or low-ranking officials, often chosen for their brutality and unwavering loyalty to the emperor. They operated with almost complete impunity. Their goal was simple meat quotas, no matter the human cost. They were not incentivized by your well-being, but by your output. A lack of progress meant their punishment, so they pushed you relentlessly, often far beyond the limits of human endurance. You'd see the cold, unfeeling glint in their eyes, knowing that your life held little value to them. For those who tried to shirk their duties, or whose bodies simply gave out from exhaustion, more severe punishments awaited. Flogging was common, a public spectacle designed to terrorize the entire camp. You'd witness men tied to posts, their backs bared, enduring dozens of lashes, their screams echoing across the desolate landscape. The wounds would fester, often leading to infection and further suffering, or even death. It was a brutal form of crowd control, a constant reminder of what awaited those who failed to comply. Beyond the whip, chains were a chilling symbol of your imprisonment. Convicts and particularly troublesome conscripts might be forced to work in shackles, heavy iron chains binding their ankles or wrists, making every step, every lift of a stone, an even greater agony. Imagine trying to haul a heavy load while dragging cumbersome chains. Their cold weight a constant physical and psychological burden. These weren't just for restraint, they were instruments of torture, designed to break the spirit as well as the body. The psychological torment was as devastating as the physical. You lived under constant surveillance, every move scrutinized. There was no privacy, no moment of true relaxation. The fear of punishment, the anxiety about meeting impossible quotas, and the despair of knowing your life was no longer your own, gnawed at your mind. This constant stress would wear down even the strongest individual, leading to mental exhaustion and profound hopelessness. You'd see men simply break, their eyes vacant, their spirits crushed, reduced to automatons going through the motions. Disobedience or perceived insubordination could lead to even more barbaric punishments. Mutilation was a real threat. Branding, cutting off noses or ears, or even blinding. These acts served as permanent, terrifying examples to others, and if you were caught trying to steal food or attempting to escape, the consequences could be immediate and horrific. Public executions were not uncommon, a final brutal lesson in the emperor's absolute authority. You'd witness men being beheaded or impaled, their bodies left on display as a grim warning. The silence that followed more terrifying than any scream. While difficult to quantify, ancient Chinese historical texts from various dynasties frequently mention harsh punishments, including mutilation and execution, for laborers on grand imperial projects, suggesting these practices were indeed used to maintain control. Even after a day's grueling work, there was no true respite. The conditions in the camps themselves were a form of ongoing punishment. Overcrowding, lack of sanitation, meager food. These were not incidental. They were part of the system that kept you weak, dependent, and easily controlled. A weakened body is less likely to rebel. A hungry man is less likely to resist. The sheer scale of this brutal discipline meant that there was little sense of shared humanity. Every man was for himself, focused on survival. Trust was a luxury you couldn't afford. Informers might be present among the workers, reporting any dissent to the overseers, further eroding any sense of camaraderie. This systematic atomization of the workforce, driven by fear, was a cruel but effective method of control. So, as you envision the Great Wall, its majestic form stretching into the distance, remember the unseen suffering that built it. Every stone, every brick, every meter of its vast length is steeped in the sweat, blood, and tears of a workforce subjected to relentless, cruel discipline. The crack of the whip, the clank of chains, and the pervasive despair of constant punishment were as much a part of its construction as the mortar and the earth. It was a monument not just to imperial power, but to human misery enforced by absolute terror. It truly makes you appreciate the concept of basic human rights, doesn't it? You felt the sting of the whip and heard the clank of chains. But beyond the physical pain and the ever-present threat of punishment, another deeper agony gnawed at the workers on the Great Wall separation and loss. A severed life. To be conscripted meant not only brutal labor, but also being forcibly torn from your home, your family, and everything familiar, often forever. Imagine the day it happened. A chilling decree from the emperor reaches your remote village. You are a farmer, perhaps with a wife, children, and elderly parents. You are told abruptly that you must report for duty on the wall, hundreds or even thousands of Li Chinese miles away. There's no negotiation, no appeal. You are given a few days, perhaps a week, to prepare. This means a frantic, tearful farewell. Your wife clings to you, knowing this might be the last time she ever sees your face. Your children, too young to fully comprehend, watch with wide, frightened eyes as their father is taken away. Your parents, their faces etched with despair, know that their main source of support, their son, is likely marching to his death. The journey itself was a prolonged act of separation. You would march in columns, guarded by soldiers, moving ever further from the familiar landscapes of your youth. Each passing village, each new mountain range, deepened the chasm between your old life and your new, brutal reality. You'd carry the faint smell of your home, the memory of your loved ones' faces, like a precious, painful burden. Archaeological evidence, such as letters found in remote garrison sites, provides poignant glimpses into the longing and despair of soldiers and conscripts separated from their families. Life on the wall was one of profound isolation. The construction sites were deliberately located in remote, desolate areas, far from any established communities. This isolation served two purposes. It brought the wall to the frontier, and it prevented escape and descent. You were cut off from communication with your family. There were no postal services for common laborers, no quick messages. News, if it ever came, would be slow, unreliable, and often grim. You would live in a constant state of agonizing uncertainty, never knowing if your family was safe, if they had enough to eat, or if they too had succumbed to disease or hardship. This prolonged separation was a form of psychological torture. You were stripped not just of your freedom, but of your identity as a son, a husband, a father. Your primary purpose became building, existing only to lay bricks and move stone. The memories of your former life would become a haunting dream, a stark contrast to the monotonous, brutal reality of the wall. You'd probably spend your precious few moments of rest dreaming of your family, their faces, their voices, a torment of what you had lost. Many workers literally disappeared into the wall. Those who died from exhaustion, disease, or accident were often buried quickly and anonymously, sometimes even within the wall itself. Their families would never know their fate. There would be no burial rites, no mourning, no gravestone to mark their passing. They simply vanished, becoming one of the countless, unrecorded casualties of the emperor's grand ambition. Imagine your family waiting, hoping, for years, never knowing if you were alive or dead, trapped in an agonizing limbo of uncertainty. This disappearance was a common and chilling reality for the families left behind. The consequences for the families were often dire. With the primary male laborer gone, your family would face severe economic hardship. Your wife might struggle to work the fields alone or resort to selling what meager possessions they had to survive. Your children might face starvation or even be forced into servitude. The conscription of one man often meant the suffering, or even the slow death of an entire family. The wall wasn't just built on the bodies of its workers, it was built on the broken lives of their families. The system was designed to prevent any meaningful connection or return. Terms of service were often indefinite, lasting for years or even for life. Even if you survived your term, the journey home was arduous and dangerous, and your old village might no longer recognize you, or even exist as you remembered it. You were a stranger, permanently altered by the ordeal, with nothing left of your former life. Historians still grapple with the precise figures of workers who returned home versus those who perished or simply integrated into new frontier communities. Though the number of returnees was undoubtedly low for most periods, the pervasive sense of hopelessness was amplified by this loss. There was no future beyond the wall, no hope of reunion, no chance of rebuilding your life. You were a man condemned, forever separated from the world you knew and loved. This profound isolation and the knowledge of your family's likely suffering would be a constant, debilitating emotional burden, making the physical toil even more unbearable. So, as you visualize the Great Wall, its imposing silhouette against the distant mountains, remember the invisible walls that separated families, the tears of farewell that watered its foundations, and the countless lives that were severed from their roots, never to return. The Great Wall stands as a testament not just to imperial power, but to the crushing burden of separation and loss, a haunting reminder of the immense human cost behind its majestic facade. It makes you want to hug your loved ones a little tighter, doesn't it? You've explored the profound personal losses of the wall's laborers, the emotional and physical toll of separation. Now, let's consider the inherent dangers not just from the elements or the overseers, but from the very act of construction itself. For the workers on the Great Wall, construction methods were primitive and perilous, turning every day into a brutal dance with potential disaster, leading to constant accidents and injuries. Imagine standing on a precipitous mountain slope, hundreds of feet above a rocky ravine. Your task is to haul enormous, irregular stones, each weighing more than your own body. Up this incline, there were no sophisticated cranes, no bulldozers, no safety harnesses. The primary tools were sheer human strength, rudimentary ropes made from hemp or animal hide, and simple wooden levers. You'd be part of a human chain, straining, sweating, and pushing, inch by agonizing inch, feeling the immense weight of the stone pressing down on your shoulders. One slip, one frayed rope, one moment of fatigue, and the stone would plummet, taking men with it. The danger of falling objects was omnipresent. Picture workers above you, chiseling rock from a quarry face, or stacking stones on a higher section of the wall. Chips of stone, loose rocks, or even tools could come hurtling down without warning. You'd constantly glance upwards, a nervous habit, your ears alert for the telltale whistle of a falling object. A direct hit could mean instant death or crippling injury, leaving you helpless and alone in the unforgiving wilderness. Then there was the peril of working at height. Many sections of the wall traversed dizzying cliffs and steep ridges. Constructing the wall in these locations often involved building temporary scaffolding, usually made from rough timber and bamboo, lashed together with rope. These structures were flimsy, unstable, and often erected without any understanding of engineering principles. Imagine climbing a rickety scaffold, carrying heavy bricks, feeling the whole structure sway precariously under the wind. A sudden gust, a rotten plank, or a misstep could send you plummeting to your death, your body breaking against the rocks far below. The height amplified every risk, making every movement a calculated gamble with your life. Trenching and excavation also carried immense risks. Before the wall could rise, foundations had to be dug, often deep into unstable soil or rock. This meant working in narrow, claustrophobic trenches, constantly fearing a cave-in. Without proper shoring or understanding of soil mechanics, the walls of the trench could collapse without warning, burying workers alive. The sounds of shifting earth, the sudden crack of timber supports, would send a jolt of terror through you, knowing that a moment later, you could be entombed beneath tons of dirt and rock. You'd see men pulled out, bruised and battered, if they were lucky, or lifeless, meant their bodies crushed. The very materials themselves presented dangers. Lime mortar, used to bind bricks and stones, was mixed by hand, often without gloves. The caustic properties of lime could cause severe chemical burns to the skin, leading to painful lesions and infections. Working with rough-hewn stone meant constant cuts, scrapes, and abrasions, perfect entry points for bacteria in an unsanitary environment. Your hands, perpetually raw and bleeding, would be a testament to this constant physical assault. The lack of proper safety protocols was a terrifying reality. There were no designated safety officers, no mandatory protective gear, no concept of risk assessment. The focus was solely on speed and quantity. Overseers pushed workers to their limits, prioritizing progress over safety. An injury wasn't a reason to stop work, it was a reason to replace the worker. This systemic disregard for human life meant that accidents were not just unfortunate incidents. They were an inherent, expected part of the construction process. While explicit safety regulations as we know them didn't exist, some historical texts mention rudimentary guidelines for quarrying or timber hauling. Though their enforcement was likely lax and varied widely by region and overseer, even simple tools, misused or poorly maintained, became dangerous. A hammer could slip, crushing a finger. A chisel could glance off stone, striking an eye. The fatigue of endless labor meant that concentration would falter, leading to even more preventable accidents. You were not just battling the elements, you were battling your own exhaustion and the inherent dangers of the crude tools and methods employed. So, as you stand before the Great Wall, admiring its ancient majesty, remember the unseen stories of countless accidents and injuries. Every segment of that monumental structure holds the silent testament of lives risked and often lost to primitive and perilous construction methods. It's a sobering thought that the wall, a symbol of strength and protection, was built upon such a foundation of human vulnerability and constant peril. It truly makes you appreciate modern construction safety standards, doesn't it? You've witnessed the perilous construction methods and the brutal realities of daily life on the wall. For many, this relentless suffering sparked a single, desperate thought escape. But for the workers on the Great Wall, escape and rebellion were not only perilous, but also carried consequences so dire that they underscored the utter despair of their situation. Imagine you are a conscripted farmer, months or even years away from your home, starving, sick, and constantly beaten. The thought of running, of breaking free from this living nightmare, burns like a fever in your mind. But the reality of escape was terrifyingly bleak. The construction sites were deliberately chosen for their remoteness. You were hundreds, often thousands, of miles from any familiar territory. The surrounding landscape was often as deadly as the work itself. Vast, uninhabited deserts, towering, impassable mountains, or dense, predator-filled forests. Even if you somehow slipped past the guards, surviving the wilderness was a monumental challenge. The imperial authorities employed a ruthless system to prevent and punish escape attempts. Guards were omnipresent, their eyes constantly scanning the work sites and the surrounding terrain. These were hardened soldiers, often from the local garrisons, loyal to the emperor and empowered to use lethal force. Any suspicious movement, any deviation from the work party, would be met with swift and brutal intervention. You'd feel their gazes on your back, knowing that a single wrong move could seal your fate. If you were caught attempting to escape, the punishment was not merely a return to labor, it was designed to be a terrifying deterrent. Summary execution was common. You might be beheaded on the spot, or publicly impaled, your body left as a gruesome warning to others. This wasn't just about making an example of you, it was about instilling absolute terror in the remaining workforce, crushing any nascent hope of freedom. Imagine witnessing a man, driven to desperation, attempt to flee, only to be cut down by a guard's arrow or spear, his life extinguished in a futile dash for liberty. For those who weren't immediately killed, the punishments were equally horrifying. Mutilation was a common fate. You might have your nose or ears cut off, your feet amputated, or your face branded with indelible marks. These disfigurements served as permanent badges of shame and warning, ensuring that even if you survived, you would forever bear the physical and social scars of your defiance. They were designed to strip you of your dignity, to make you a living, breathing testament to imperial cruelty. Beyond individual escape, the idea of collective rebellion was even more fraught with peril. Organizing such a rebellion among a diverse, often fearful, and atomized workforce was incredibly difficult. The workers spoke different dialects, came from different regions, and were constantly under surveillance. Any whisper of dissent, any attempt to rally others could be reported by informers, some of whom might be fellow workers desperate for a favor from the overseers, leading to swift and brutal suppression. When rebellions did occur, they were typically small, desperate uprisings, quickly and savagely crushed by the disciplined imperial troops. The consequences for participants and often their entire families would be absolute destruction. Villages might be razed, families enslaved, and entire regions punished for the perceived defiance of a few. This disproportionate retaliation was a deliberate policy to ensure that the cost of rebellion far outweighed any potential gain. Historians often note the scarcity of large-scale, successful worker rebellions during the major construction phases of the Great Wall, attributing this to the extreme brutality of imperial suppression and the overwhelming odds faced by the laborers. The psychological toll of this lack of escape was immense. You were trapped. The wall was not just a physical barrier, it was a psychological prison. The knowledge that even death was preferable to the suffering, but that even death might not come quickly, created a profound sense of despair. Hope, that most powerful of human emotions, was systematically extinguished. You simply endured, day after day, in a state of resigned misery. Some historical accounts and folklore whisper of workers who disappeared into the vastness of China, perhaps finding refuge among remote communities or living as outlaws. But these would have been incredibly rare exceptions, against impossible odds. For the vast majority, once you were on the wall, your life was fundamentally forfeit, your destiny tied to its unending construction. So, as you stand before the Great Wall, admiring its ancient majesty, remember the chilling reality behind every escape attempt. The sheer desperation that drove men to risk instant death or brutal mutilation for a fleeting chance at freedom speaks volumes about the utter misery of their existence. The wall stands not only as a testament to imperial power, but also as a stark, enduring symbol of a life from which there was virtually no escape. A monument built on the crushing despair of its unwilling creators. It truly puts a whole new spin on freedom, doesn't it? You've witnessed the brutal forced labor, the harsh environments, the gnawing hunger, the rampant death, the cruel discipline, and the desperate futility of escape. As our journey through the suffering of the Great Wall workers concludes, let's reflect on a monument built on suffering, the profound human cost behind this iconic structure. A symbol of immense national pride, but also of unspeakable human misery. Imagine standing atop a section of the Great Wall today, feeling the wind whip around you, gazing at the seemingly endless serpentine structure stretching across mountains and valleys. It's an awe-inspiring sight, a testament to ancient ambition and engineering. But now, as you look at it, you see more than just stone and mortar. You see the ghosts of millions. The Great Wall, in its various iterations and dynasties, was built not just by bricks and earth, but by the sweat, blood, and tears of countless forced laborers. It was a project that devoured human lives on an almost incomprehensible scale. While exact numbers remain elusive due to the passage of time and lack of comprehensive records, historical accounts and archaeological evidence consistently point to a staggering mortality rate. The term longest graveyard in the world isn't merely poetic hyperbole. It's a grim description of a reality where workers died by the thousands, their bodies often interred within the very foundations they were forced to lay. This monument represents a chilling example of imperial power at its most absolute and ruthless. The emperors of China, driven by the desire for defense, unification, and immortal legacy, wielded their authority with a complete disregard for individual human lives. The vast scale of the project necessitated a disposable workforce, and the conscription, punishment, and deaths of millions were simply accepted as an unavoidable cost. The wall stands as a tangible reminder of what can be achieved when a state commands unlimited power over its populace. And when human suffering is deemed an acceptable price for national ambition, it also highlights the enduring human capacity for resilience, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. Despite the brutal conditions, the hunger, the disease, and the constant threat of death, millions of individuals continue to work, to survive, to endure. For generations, their ability to simply put one foot in front of the other, to chip away at rock, to lay brick after brick, day after grueling day, speaks to an incredible, almost terrifying tenacity of the human spirit. They built this wonder, not out of loyalty or patriotism, but out of sheer desperate will to survive. The wall is also a silent witness to the harsh realities of ancient frontier life. It reminds us of the constant threat of nomadic incursions from the north, the very real dangers that prompted such a colossal defensive effort. While the wall's effectiveness as a military barrier is still debated by historians, its existence speaks volumes about the perceived perils and the immense efforts undertaken to secure the Chinese heartland. It was a physical manifestation of a nation's deep-seated anxieties. While the wall's military effectiveness is a subject of ongoing academic debate, its psychological impact as a symbol of Chinese civilization's boundary and resilience is widely acknowledged. Perhaps most profoundly, the Great Wall serves as a powerful, if somber, symbol of forced collective memory. For centuries, Chinese folklore and literature have whispered tales of the wall's human cost, of weeping women whose tears could wash down its stones, of husbands buried within its foundations. This oral tradition, passed down through generations, ensures that the suffering is not entirely forgotten, even as the structure itself is lauded as a national treasure. It's a monument that simultaneously evokes pride in achievement and a deep sorrow for the human lives sacrificed to its construction. So, as the sun sets over the Great Wall, casting long shadows across its ancient stones, let your thoughts linger on the unseen stories woven into its very fabric. Every part of its vast, winding length is a silent testament to the unimaginable suffering of the men, women, and children who perished building it. It is a monument that reminds us of humanity's boundless ambition, but also of its capacity for cruelty and the extraordinary, heartbreaking cost of forced labor. It stands not only as one of the wonders of the world, but as a powerful, eternal symbol of profound human misery. All right, as the last echoes of our journey through the brutal realities of the Great Wall, workers fade into the quiet of the night, it's time to gently bring our minds back to the present. You've walked through their suffering, felt the chill of their despair, and now, perhaps, you see this iconic structure with new eyes. It's a powerful reminder that history, in its quietest corners, often reveals the most poignant truths about human endurance and sacrifice. Let the images of hard labor, hunger and disease, and hopelessness fade away, giving way to the quiet peace around you. The smell of dust and the harshness of the distant frontier fade, giving way to the familiar comfort of your own space. Let any lingering thoughts of whips and chains gently drift away, replaced by a sense of relaxation and peaceful reflection. The struggles and sacrifices of the laborers of old are now, temporarily, part of your understanding, enriching your sense of history and the value of freedom and life. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, know that the stories of the past are always here, waiting patiently to be rediscovered whenever you seek a gentle escape into the depths of time. But now the journey is complete. Rest easy, knowing that another story has been revealed, gently, just for you.